Addis Ababa's morning sun poured golden light through the hospital's glass walls, catching on the edges of Nurse Cynthia Tesfaye's uniform. She was known for her calm nature, her dedication, and her quiet smile that had a way of soothing even the most irritable patients. That day, chaos had erupted in the ER. A team from Korea's top medical institute had arrived to collaborate on a humanitarian cardiac project. Among them was Dr. Jaein Woo, a young billionaire surgeon from Seoul, world-renowned for his robotic heart surgery innovations. He was brilliant but cold, his words sharp, his eyes unreadable. Staff whispered that he had no interest in women, that his last relationship had ended years ago when he discovered he felt nothing. No affection, no desire. Medicine was his only passion. Cynthia didn't believe gossip until she met him. He was precision wrapped in a lab coat. His voice deep but distant, his focus absolute. When he ordered something, no one dared to question him. But Cynthia did that morning when he barked at a junior nurse. "Doctor," she said softly, stepping in. "She's only trying to help. You don't have to shout." Jaein Woo looked at her, really looked, and for a split second something flickered in his chest. That flicker, however, turned to chaos 2 hours later. During a resuscitation attempt on a young boy, Cynthia leaned over to hand Dr. Jaein the ventilator mask. A sudden tremor of power surge jolted the lights, and as the doctor turned quickly, their faces collided. Her lips brushed him. It was quick, accidental, but something inside him shattered awake. He froze. She gasped. The world around them blurred into silence. Their eyes met, both wide in disbelief. I'm sorry, doctor," she stammered, backing away. "It was an accident. Don't apologize," he murmured, touching his lips as if trying to understand what had just happened. That night, Jaein Woo couldn't sleep. He had kissed women before, out of politeness, curiosity, or social expectation. But this was different. That one accidental brush of her lips had ignited something he never knew existed within him. He found himself replaying the scene. The warmth of her breath, the softness of her mouth, the panic in her eyes, and the strange rush that followed. For the first time in his life, Dr. Jaein felt wanted. The next day, he arrived at the hospital unusually early, just to see her. He masked it as checking rounds. "Nurse Cynthia," he said when he found her arranging supplies. "You are competent. I want you on my team for the surgery program." She blinked. "Me? But there are senior nurses." "I said I want you," he cut in, voice lower than usual. From that day, she worked directly under him. And every day, she felt his eyes on her. Not harshly, not professionally, but curiously, intensely. When she smiled at patients, his chest tightened. When she laughed with another male doctor, his jaw clenched. Scared him. The man who mastered every human heart couldn't control his own. Weeks passed. Jaein began to find excuses to see her. Check the vitals again. Assist me with sutures. Join the post-op meeting. At first, Cynthia found it strange, then flattering, then confusing. His cold demeanor softened when she was around. He would linger near her, listen when she spoke, even smile faintly. Something no one had ever seen him do. But obsession quietly replaced curiosity. One evening, as rain drummed on the hospital's windows, Cynthia stayed late to update patient charts. When she looked up, she found him watching her from the doorway, his white coat unbuttoned, his tie loosened. "Dr. Jaein?" she asked gently. "You're still here." "I couldn't leave," he said softly. "Not while you're here." The words hung heavy between them. Cynthia's heart fluttered. Confusion, fear, and something deeper she didn't want to name. "Doctor, please, don't say things like that." "Why not?" He stepped closer. "You think I don't mean it?" His hand trembled as it reached for her, then stopped midway. He clenched his fist and turned away, fighting himself. "That kiss changed me," he confessed under his breath. "I don't understand what you did to me, Cynthia. I used to feel nothing. Now I can't stop thinking about you." Her eyes softened. "It was an accident, doctor. You don't owe me anything. But what if I want to owe you everything? Months of collaboration turned into something deeper. Cynthia learned that behind his genius was a man shaped by pain, a mother who abandoned him, a father who turned love into a transaction. His lack of desire wasn't natural. It was a shield, and somehow her warmth began to melt it away. He followed her to Addis Ababa's open markets, curious about her laughter among the colors and chaos. She took him to a church on Sunday, and he stood beside her, silently watching her lips move in prayer. Each moment softened him, each smile, each touch accidental or otherwise, until one night, under the moonlit terrace of the hospital guest house, he finally confessed. "Cynthia, I came to Ethiopia to fix hearts, but you fixed mine." Tears filled her eyes. "And you healed parts of me I didn't know were broken." When he learned this time, there was no accident, only quiet certainty. Their kiss was gentle, but filled with everything they'd both denied themselves for so long. Dr. Jayan extended his stay indefinitely. He opened a foundation in Ethiopia to train local nurses and doctors, and Cynthia became its head nurse. The staff soon learned never to tease her about the quiet Korean man who watched her like she was sunlight. And when they finally married, in a small ceremony surrounded by cherry blossoms and acacia flowers, he whispered to her ear, "That mistake was the best diagnosis of my life." She smiled, touching his cheek. "Then let's never cure it." And with that, the man who once couldn't feel love found himself forever addicted to the woman whose accidental kiss woke his heart. The morning air in Seoul was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of spring blossoms from the palace gardens. Cynthia stood by the window of their apartment, the skyline shimmering like a dream. The city felt vast, strange, and beautiful, but most of all it felt theirs. Behind her, Dr. Jayan Woo stirred awake, his usual sharp, disciplined self replaced by a quiet softness only she could draw out of him. He watched her in the gentle light, the curve of her shoulders, the way her hair framed her face, and realized once again how deeply she'd changed him. "You're staring again," she said with a smile, turning toward him. "I'm studying the most miraculous heart I've ever encountered," he murmured. She laughed lightly, walking over to him. "You're a doctor, not a poet." "You made me both," he said simply. He reached for her hand and pressed it against his chest. His heart beat steady and strong, but slower, peaceful. Once it had raced only from adrenaline and ambition. Now it beat her. "When I first met you," he whispered, "my world was all noise, surgery schedules, contracts, deadlines. But when you came, everything went quiet." Cynthia's eyes shimmered. "Maybe you just needed someone to remind you that hearts aren't only meant to work, they're meant to feel." He kissed her forehead gently. "And you taught me how." Life in Seoul tested them in quiet ways. Cynthia had to adjust to the pace, the language, the subtle walls people built around strangers. Yet, every evening, Jayan was her constant, waiting for her at the door with tea in hand, asking about her day, listening like her. Words were sacred. He would walk her through the Han River Park on weekends, holding her hand like he was still afraid she'd vanish. Sometimes he'd stop mid-conversation, just to look at her. "What?" she'd laugh. "I'm still trying to believe you're real," he'd say, brushing her cheek. "Sometimes I fear I'll wake up and be back in that empty hospital room before you existed." Cynthia leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Then let me remind you every day that you're not dreaming." And she did, with little notes in his coat pocket, with breakfast before dawn when he had surgeries, with the warmth of her smile when his world felt cold. One evening, as a soft rain fell over Seoul, they found themselves walking without umbrellas, laughing like children. The city lights shimmered through the drizzle, and the streets smelled of wet blossoms and earth. Jayan pulled her close beneath the awning of a cafe. Water dripped from their hair, their fingers entwined. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think love was a distraction, something that made men weak. And now," he smiled faintly, "now I know it's the only thing that makes life worth living." He brushed a raindrop from her eyelashes, his thumb lingering near her lips. I love you, Cynthia, not just for what you gave me, but for what you made me want to give. Peace, laughter, and every heartbeat I have left. Tears mixed with the rain on her cheeks. And I'll spend my life giving it back. He kissed her. Slow, tender, reverent. The kind of kiss that spoke of gratitude, devotion, and a love that needed no words. Years later, in the quiet of their shared life, Jade often found himself reflecting. He had performed thousands of surgeries, saved countless hearts, but the one that mattered most was the one Cynthia had healed, his own. When she entered a room, his entire world still paused. When she spoke his name, the years between their first meeting and now seemed to collapse into one eternal moment of love rediscovered. Sometimes, late at night, he would whisper to her as she slept beside him. That accident was no mistake, was it? Maybe destiny just found a clumsy way to introduce you to me. And she, half asleep, would smile and whisper back, "Then I hope destiny keeps making mistakes like that." He'd wrap her in his arms, resting his chin against her hair, and for a man who once believed he couldn't feel, he now understood what it meant to live completely. Their story became a quiet legend in the hospital circles, the Ethiopian nurse who awakened a heart that science could never fix. But to them, it wasn't a story. It was simply life, imperfect, kind, and beautifully ordinary. Because real love, they learned, isn't about perfection or grand gestures. It's about the gentle moments, the whispered prayers, the shared smiles, the devotion that lingers even when the world grows silent. And so, every day, when he kissed her good morning and she smiled up at him with that same warmth from years ago, it reminded them both that the heart doesn't just beat to survive, it beats love. Time didn't dull their love, it deepened it. 3 years into marriage, Seoul had become home. Their apartment overflowed with plants Cynthia tended to like patience and recovery, and the shelves were filled with framed photos. Their first anniversary in Jeju, a charity mission in Ethiopia, and a candid shot of Jade sleeping on her lap after a long shift. Each day had its rhythm. Slow mornings with coffee, laughter echoing in the kitchen, and quiet evenings when they would watch the sunset melt behind the skyline. But what made their love different was the way they still looked at each other. Like the world kept beginning again, every time their eyes met. One morning, while Cynthia was dressing for work, Jade leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "You're going to make me late," she teased without turning. "You always say that," he murmured, walking over to wrap his arms around her waist. "But you never understand. Time doesn't matter when you're this close." She smiled, turning in his arms. "And you're still the same man who used to scold interns for being a minute late. That was before I discovered that one smile from you can make hours disappear." He kissed her forehead, his voice barely a whisper. "I still don't know how I lived before you." Cynthia's gentle heart drew everyone close. She became known among Seoul's hospitals not just as the foreign nurse who saved lives, but as the one who brought warmth to every patient she touched. And yet, she often worried she might never completely belong in his world. The high society gatherings, the formal dinners, the women in elegant silk and flawless Korean speech. One night, after a particularly formal charity gala, she sat quietly on their balcony, gazing at the stars. Jade came out, his tie loosened, 2 cups of tea in hand. "You were quiet tonight," he said softly. She nodded. "Sometimes I still feel like I don't fit in your world." He sat beside her, setting the cups down. Then he took her hand and placed it against his heart, just as he had years ago. "Cynthia, you are my world. All those people, those events, they fade the moment you walk in. You're not a guest in my life. You're the reason it exists." Her eyes glistened. "And you're my peace." He kissed her hand tenderly, eyes never leaving hers. "Then we're even. I gave you a home, and you gave me a heart." Their love was not loud. It was lived quietly in the little things, in shared glances across hospital corridors, in handwritten notes tucked into lunchboxes. In this way, he always warmed her hands during winter walks. One evening, as snow began to fall, Cynthia sat by the fireplace reading. Jade came in from work, exhaustion written across his face. She stood to greet him, But before she could speak, he wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight, wordlessly. She rested her cheek against his chest. "Hard day." "Yes," he murmured. "But it ended the moment I saw you." He leaned back slightly to look at her face. "When I was in surgery today, I realized something. Every heartbeat I've ever repaired, every life I've saved, they all remind me of you. You're the reason I fight so hard for life itself." Her voice trembled with emotion. "And you're the reason I believe in love's miracles." He smiled softly, kissed her temple, and whispered, "Then let's keep believing together." Years passed like gentle seasons. Their hair grew a little grayer, their laughter a little louder. Some nights they'd still dance in the living room, barefoot, no music, just the sound of their hearts keeping time. Other nights, they'd sit side by side, their fingers interlocked, the world silent around them. Once, when Cynthia asked him what he loved most about her after all those years, Jade thought for a moment and said, "That you still look at me like you did the day you first saw me, before the money, before the name, before everything. You still see me." Tears shimmered in her eyes. "Because you still love me like it's the first time, Jade." And in that quiet truth, they both understood. Love isn't about how long it lasts. It's about how deeply it grows. On their 15th anniversary, they returned to Ethiopia. The hospital where they first met now stood taller, brighter, with a plaque that read, "The Heart Foundation, for every beat that deserves a second chance." Hand in hand, they walked through the halls, surrounded by young doctors and nurses whose smiles carried their legacy. Jade looked at Cynthia and said softly, "It all began with one accidental kiss." She smiled, and it turned into a lifetime of purpose. He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "Cynthia, if love had a face, it would be yours." And under the warm Ethiopian sun, surrounded by the echoes of healed hearts and laughter, they kissed again. Not as doctor and nurse, not as billionaire and dreamer, but simply as two souls who never stopped choosing each other. The years had slowed their pace, but never their hearts. Every morning still began the same way, with Jade waking before dawn, brewing her favorite coffee, and sitting quietly beside her as sunlight poured into their home. Cynthia loved those moments most, when words weren't needed, when silence felt sacred. One morning, she found him standing by the window, still in his pajamas, staring out at the city wrapped in morning mist. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly, wrapping her arms around him from behind. He smiled faintly, covering her hands with his. "About how blessed I am to wake up and find you still here." She rested her cheek against his back. "You make it sound like I'd ever leave you." He turned, cupping her face gently. "You've given me more than I deserve, Cynthia. I used to think love faded with time, but somehow, mine for you grows stronger with every sunrise." Her eyes glowed with emotion. "Then maybe time just teaches love how to breathe deeper." He kissed her forehead, slow, tender, reverent. As the city stirred awake below them, their days were woven with small acts of care. Simple gestures that said "I love you" without words. She would tuck a note into his briefcase before work. "Don't forget to eat lunch, my heart surgeon." He would leave a daisy on her pillow before bed, whispering, "You're still the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." When one of them fell ill, the other became both caretaker and comfort. Once, when Jade caught a fever from overworking, Cynthia stayed by his side all night. She pressed a cool cloth to his forehead and fed him soup, brushing his hair from his eyes. Half conscious, he murmured, "Why do you still look at me like that, even when I'm useless?" She smiled softly. "Because you're never useless to the one whose heart you healed." His fingers brushed hers weakly. "Then I'm the luckiest patient alive." To celebrate their 10th anniversary, Jade surprised her with a quiet trip to Jeju Island. No hospitals, no meetings, just sea, sky, and each other. They walked barefoot along the black sand beach as waves lapped at their feet. The wind carried her laughter like a song, and Jade thought it was the most beautiful sound on earth. At sunset, they sat on a cliffside bench, the horizon glowing gold. Remember, Cynthia whispered, when you used to fear love? He smiled. Now I fear only one thing. What's that? A day without you. She leaned against his shoulder. Then we'll make sure there's never one. They sat in silence, the sea roaring softly below them. Two souls who had traveled the world but found home only in each other. Their love became its own melody. Steady, sweet, and endless. Sometimes she would sing softly while cooking, and he'd pause in the doorway, watching her with quiet admiration. You still sing off-key, he'd tease. She'd turn and smirk. And you still love it. Hopelessly, he'd admit, wrapping his arms around her waist. On winter nights, they'd sit by the fire, reading together. Her head would rest on his shoulder, his arm draped around her. He'd often stop mid-sentence, just to look at her profile in the glow. What? She'd ask, smiling. I still can't believe you're mine. She'd close her book and lift her eyes to his. I was never yours, Giant. We were always ours. And he'd smile, because that was the truth he'd learned through every quiet, devoted year. Love isn't possession. It's partnership. One evening, after a long day at the hospital, Giant returned home to find candles lit, soft music playing, and Cynthia waiting with dinner. What's all this? He asked, smiling in surprise. Nothing special, she said, though her eyes sparkled. Just a reminder that love doesn't need an occasion. They ate slowly, laughing and reminiscing about their first meeting. The chaos, the accident, the kiss that changed everything. After dinner, they danced. No grand steps, just slow swaying, their foreheads touching. Do you ever regret it? She asked softly. He shook his head, voice low. Never. That one accident gave me everything worth living for. Cynthia smiled through tears. And it gave me you. He kissed her then. Not out of passion, but pure, enduring affection. The kind of kiss that felt like home. Years later, people would say they were inseparable. The doctor and the nurse whose love outlasted time. When they walked through the hospital garden hand in hand, the younger staff often whispered, "That's what true love looks like." And maybe it was. And said softly, "It all began with one accidental kiss." She smiled. And it turned into a lifetime of purpose. He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. Cynthia, if love had a face, it would be yours. And under the warm Ethiopian sun, surrounded by the echoes of healed hearts and laughter, they kissed again. Not as doctor and nurse, not as billionaire and dreamer, but simply as two souls who never stopped choosing each other. The years had slowed their pace, but never their hearts. Every morning still began the same way, with Giant waking before dawn, brewing her favorite coffee, and sitting quietly beside her as sunlight poured into their home. Cynthia loved those moments most, when words weren't needed, when silence felt sacred. One morning, she found him standing by the window, still in his pajamas, staring out at the city wrapped in morning mist. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly, wrapping her arms around him from behind. He smiled faintly, covering her hands with his. "About how blessed I am to wake up and find you still here." She rested her cheek against his back. "You make it sound like I'd ever leave you." He turned, cupping her face gently. "You've given me more than I deserve, Cynthia. I used to think love faded with time, but somehow, mine for you grows stronger with every sunrise." Her eyes glowed with emotion. "Then maybe time just teaches love how to breathe deeper." He kissed her forehead, slow, tender, reverent. As the city stirred awake below them, their days were woven with small acts of care. Simple gestures that said "I love you" without words. She would tuck a note into his briefcase before work. "Don't forget to eat lunch, my heart surgeon." He would leave a daisy on her pillow before bed, whispering, "You're still the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." When one of them fell ill, the other became both caretaker and comfort. Once, when Giant caught a fever from overworking, Cynthia stayed by his side all night. She pressed a cool cloth to his forehead and fed him soup, brushing his hair from his eyes. Half conscious, he murmured, "Why do you still look at me like that?" Even when I'm useless. She smiled softly. Because you're never useless to the one whose heart you healed. His fingers brushed hers weakly. Then I'm the luckiest patient alive. To celebrate their 10th anniversary, Giant surprised her with a quiet trip to Jeju Island. No hospitals, no meetings, just sea, sky, and each other. Episode 1 ends here. The next episode comes up soon. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment. Also like, share, and subscribe to my channel and click on the notification icon so that you will get notified whenever a new story is uploaded.